Okay guys, welcome back. Dr. H here on behalf of Octo Media, and this is the fourth tutorial in my basic orientation for Maya, which is the modeling and animation program. So today I'm going to teach you quite a few things. I'm going to teach you how to set up your settings and preferences, how to use something called the outliner, how to use something called Booleans to create really cool models like these weird kind of flesh flower things that I've got here, and the basic door frame that you see here. But first of all, I'm going to show you how to set up and save your project, because that is the most important thing you're going to need to know how to do. Okay guys, so file organization and saving your file. So you'll notice I've got this star up here, it's untitled. I haven't saved my file at all yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click Command S, and when I do, you can see it brings up all of the projects that I've been working on here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new folder here, a new project. I'm going to call this Flesh Flower. So once I've created my save folder here for Flesh Flower, what I need to do down here is set project. So I click on set project. It says, well, which project are we in? Which one are we using? Well, we're using Flesh Flower. So I click on Flesh Flower and then I click set. And then it gives me this option here where I can select another location or create a default workspace. It's this middle option that you want, and that will create your basic settings. So the workspace is a mail script here that contains all of your settings. We'll get into those in a moment. And you can see flower is the name of my save file here. I'm going to save that. That's what's already in the Flesh Flower folder. Save as. But most importantly, I'm not going to overwrite it here. Most importantly, you can see the current project is now Flesh Flower. That's really important because that means all of my files are going to be organized into this folder. And if I wanted to take my project that I've worked on at home and take it into my place of work, my school, and work there, then all I would need to do is copy this whole folder here. So it's really important safety tip, really important thing that's worth knowing. I built this originally because I wasn't paying attention. I built it in my old bridge game, which means all of the textures, the flesh and the plaster and everything else are in my bridge game folder. I'm going to drag them into my Flesh Flower folder down here, just so that everything is nice and neat and where it should be. Whenever you download an asset, whenever you download a texture or anything else, you always save it to your project folder. There's a very important reason for this. If I was to take this folder to work, to school, and try and open this file here, and all of these textures are saved on my home computer, then what I'm going to get is something that looks a bit like that, because it's looking for textures that are on my home computer. It can't find them. So it's really important to make sure that whenever you save textures or anything else, you save them in the folder that you've created for your project. So project, to set a project, it's really straightforward. You go into the save or save scene, save scene as, and you just set the project down here. You set it to whichever one of these folders you want. I want Flesh Flower, set that. That is my current project. Everything I save now, everything I do, I should save into this folder here. So the first thing I want to do is I want to show you how to change the settings and preferences. This can be done by going into Windows, Settings, Preferences, like so. There's a reason that we do this first, because this will determine the units that we are modeling in for the rest of our project. Once you've set it up and saved it for the project, you shouldn't need to do this again. Once it's set up, it's set up. So Maya defaults its units of measurement to centimeters. Let me show you what that means. If I create a cube here and I frame in on that cube is 1 by 1 by 1. 1 what? Well, 1 centimetre, because that's the default. If I want to make something that I'm going to put in a game engine like Unity, where the default is meters, then I probably ought to be modelling in meters in the first instance. So watch what happens if I change this to meters. The grid instantly zooms out, and I've got this tiny 1 centimetre object here still. If I delete that and rebuild, just click cube again, this time I've got a much bigger cube. It's still 1 by 1 by 1, but now it's 1 by 1 by 1 meters. So first thing you do in preferences is set it to meters. You want to be modeling in meters. The angular controls the rotation. So you can have degrees or you can have radians. So for example, if I just rotate this object really quickly by 90 degrees here, 360 degrees in a circle, if I rotate it by 90 degrees like such, if I now change the units to radians, you can see it's automatically defaulted to 1.571. I don't really know what radians are. I'm going to stick to degrees because I know there are 360 degrees in a circle, and I know that 90 degrees turns the object, rotates the object through one right angle, like so. The way Maya works with its rotation, you can type in 180 degrees, obviously. You could type in 90 degrees. You could type in 270 degrees, but the same effect could be achieved by just typing in minus 90 degrees. 180 is the same as minus 180, and if you wanted to go 181 degrees, that's the same as minus 179 degrees. So you'll have to decide which way you want to work, whether you want to work purely positive or whether you want to work with positives and negatives, a mixture of the two. But either way, you're definitely going to want your angular to be in degrees. Finally is the frames per second. Now, if you're creating an animation like kind of Pixar or three-dimensional animation just for going out on YouTube, then you can probably leave this in 24. In fact, it's a good idea to leave it in 24 because 24 is divisible by 2, by 6, by 4, by 3, by 12, which makes it really easy to animate things once we come onto the timeline that we'll get onto in a later tutorial. However, if you know you want to work with digital film, it can sometimes be useful to change up to 25 frames per second if that's what you're working with digital PAL, or perhaps 30 frames per second if you're working in the US, NTSC, or higher frame rates here as the frame rate of the video is set. So if you're working in a higher frame rate of 60 frames per second, if you've recorded your video in 60 frames per second, the chances are you want to make your animation in 60 frames per second as well. For today, we're going to leave it at 24 because 24 is a really useful frames per second for it to be in, and it's also the frame rate that's used in old traditional cine film. So the preferences that you generally want to work with are meters, degrees, and 24 frames per second. I'm going to click save on that, and they're done. So that was Windows, settings, preferences. And once that's set up, you can see I go back into it, everything is saved the way it was before. So I'm happy with that. I can cancel, I can come out of that. I don't need to do anything else with that. Now the next thing I want to show you, I'm just going to duplicate this cube a couple of times to show you this. In fact, what I might do is create a vertical chain of these. There we go. So I've got 3. I'm just going to frame in on the middle one so we can see what we're doing. What I want to do now is I want to show you a different way to organize things and a different way to group things. In order to do that, we're going to need access to something called the outliner. So I'm going to go up to Windows, outliner down here, just underneath the settings and preferences that we've just used. So you click on outliner, it tabs in here. You can take it out, but it's pretty useful if it's tabbed in. The outliner in Maya is a little bit like the hierarchy in Unity. It allows you to see the various assets that are in here. I haven't named them, but you can see there they are. And it also allows you to group them and create parent-child relationships. So what does it mean to create parent and child relationships? Well, I'll show you. I'm just going to rename this cube here as cube parent. And you can see the name changes in the outliner over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it so that when I rotate this object, these objects also rotate with it. In order to do that, I'm going to shift select these two objects, and then, and this is key, I'm going to middle mouse button drag them. I'm going to click and hold the middle mouse button, and I'm going to drag them onto the parent like so. If I just expand this box here, you can see now that this is the parent, but these are the children. So I can still individually manipulate the children like so, rotate that one that way, rotate that one that way, just for argument's sake. But if I grab the parent and start spinning it around, everything else comes with it. Using parent and child relationships will become pretty essential once we get into rigging and animating in a later tutorial. So the outliner can be found in Windows Outliner, and it's a middle mouse button, click and drag, in order to create parent and child relationships in Maya. So I'm going to delete these now because I don't want them in my scene anymore. And I'm also just going to click the outliner off so it disappears into the side there. So the next thing I want to show you is a modeling tool called Booleans, which you can find in the modeling menu here up in Mesh, Booleans. We're going to look at Boolean difference. You can play around with Boolean, union and intersection later on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a basic wall. I'm just going to model this really quickly. Doesn't have to be exact, doesn't have to be perfect, so on and so forth. This is going to be a wall, and I'm just going to raise the wall up by, if I make it 6 high, I'm going to raise the wall up by 3, So it's sitting on the floor like so. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a space for a door to go in here. I'm going to cut into it, almost like a kind of cookie cutter, cutting in with cookie dough. So what I'm going to do in order to do that is I'm just going to cut it with another cube. Now I could create cube down here, but I don't really need to. I've already got a cube. I'm just going to duplicate this cube with Command D. And what I'm then going to do, stretch it out like that, shrink it down like that, and finally shrink it and just position it so that it does go through. Got to make sure that it goes through the floor. It doesn't matter if it's sitting all the way out or a little bit out. That'll determine the height, but it can't be in like that. Otherwise, I won't cut all the way through. So I'm going to go like that. That's the basic object. So what you do next is pretty straightforward and also pretty cool. You click on the object that you want to cut into, the cookie dough, first. Then you hold Shift and you click on the object that you want to do the cutting, the cookie cutter. Then you go up to Mesh, Booleans, Difference. And what it does is it takes away the second object and leaves that space in the first object. So it's created a door frame like so. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to show you how I made that wonderful flesh flower that you saw at the start of the tutorial. So it's worth pointing out, I've just created a model here that doesn't have the right geometry for me. It's got too many intersections going round and not enough intersections going up. I'm just going to show you how to fix that. Of course, I could have gone into Create here and changed the settings like this, but more often than not, you tend to create something and then want to change them afterwards. So if you look along here, I want polycylinder 1 here. This gives me the same options. I'm going to take, if I take the subdivisions down, you can see it's removing geometry, it's removing the triangular faces, and it's removing or adding the number of intersections here. I'm going to put this up to about 10 because I think that's going to be enough for me. I'm also going to bring in 5 subdivisions of height, like so. Subdivision caps works along the top by adding more like that, so I could kind of grade it and bring it out. I don't want to do that. I'm happy with the one that I had for now because I'm not going to use that. So now I'm going to move into a quick speed modeling mode, and I'm going to show you how I made that wonderful flesh flower back at the start. What I'm going to do is I'm going to texture that using a couple of textures that I've downloaded here. I'm going to download that one. That's going to be the basic outside. I'm going to call that one skin. Oops, I called it sin, never mind. And I'm going to download that. That's going to be the basic inside. I know, kind of cool, isn't it? I'm going to call that one flesh. So, I'm going to create a new material down here. It's going to be a Lambert. I'll name it afterwards. I'm going to attach a file to it. That file is going to be skin, or sin, as I've said here. Okay, alright. Just go and rename that now to skin. And I might change the texture zoom a little bit because it doesn't quite look how I want it to. Focus, focus, and repeat UV. Let's go 3 by 3. What's that one? Yeah, that's kind of where we came in, isn't it? Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a petal to go up the top, and this is very important because I created this with 10 subdivisions. I'm going to create my polygon primitive petal with the same number of subdivisions, and I'm going to use the same system as I used before. I'm going to use a Boolean system to cut into it. I might just stretch it a little bit first. It doesn't quite show through. Kind of there. Yeah, that's good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this to cut into it, to deform it up at the top. So I'm going to bring that up like so. And before I do this, I'm just going to duplicate this because I think this would be quite nice to drop that back down in as the kind of the flower petal in the middle. So select the object you want to cut into, Shift, select the cutter, Mesh, Booleans, Difference. And if I just frame in on that, there's my weird thing. Okay, so I've got a little bit of geometry here that's kind of hanging around after the fact. In order to get rid of that, the best way I've found is to go to face mode and just delete all the faces. Remember to delete both sides of the faces. I'll just do this like so. Come over. If I tell you, I'm going to use this tool. I'm going to use the lasso tool because then I can draw around exactly what I want to delete, and just delete them and get them out of the system like so. Okay, let's go back into object mode. So I'm going to texture that with the same texture I've used before. I'm going to use an existing material. I'm going to use down at the bottom flesh like so. Frame in on that. It ain't perfect, but I can live with it right now. And then I'm going to move this thing inside of it like so. Drop it down into the core like that. And of course, finally, for the funnest, I'm going to texture this. And I'm going to use a slightly shinier Fong material so it kind of glistens and gleams. And I'm going to use the flesh file on this. File 3. Attach the file here. Flesh. Like so. And now I've got that wonderful kind of cracked egg thing going on. So if you look in the outliner here, you'll see it's kept a record. Maya's kept a record of all the things I've done. And I really don't want these getting in the way when I export my final model out. So the thing I need to do is I need to go Edit, Delete All by Type when I'm finished with it, and delete the history. Delete all, but not delete by type, delete all by type, history. And that just pares it right back down to the basic important things. So what have I got here? I've got my stem, that's going to be the parent. I've got my petal in the inside. I've got this polysphere out here that I'll rename shell. And I'm going to make the petal, oops, so I've renamed the wrong thing, shell. I'm going to make the petal and the shell children of the stem, so that wherever the stem goes, there we go, wherever the stem, oops, whoops, wherever the stem goes, the children go with it. I'm going to put one there. Bring it outside the doorway. I'm going to duplicate that. I'm going to put one there. I'm going to rotate it round so it's not immediately obvious that it's exactly the same object. And I'm going to roll back like that, and we've got our kind of weird alien flower things going on. I'm just going to drop into a quick speed model here while I texture this up with some really basic textures, and we can see what this whole thing looks like. Today we've learned how to set a project and save all of our files into it. We've learned how to set up our preferences so that we're modelling in the right units that we want. We've also learned how to use the outliner to organise parent and child relationships. And finally, we've learned how to use something called a Boolean difference construction to model these really quite cool flowers down here. I hope this has been of use to you and given you enough information to practice and play around whilst building your very own scenes. I've been Dr. H on behalf of Octo Media. Do please click subscribe for future tutorials, and thank you for watching.